Good evening. Welcome to WBUR CitySpace. I'm Stephen Davies, senior producer here. Thank you all for coming out, and thank you to our online viewers watching the live stream. I'm pleased to welcome to CitySpace Mayor Michelle Wu. Now in her third year, Mayor Wu started her term with a number of firsts, as I'm sure you're aware. But in light of Women's History Month, we should note she's the first woman, first Asian American. She is also the first mother to be elected mayor of Boston. Not only that, Mayor Wu took office amid the global pandemic, economic strife, and a polarized electorate with protesters right outside her own home. Let's say the mayor is busy, and we've been talking with her team for a little over a year now for this interview at CitySpace, just to let you know how busy she is. So thank you, Mayor. Boston continues to face major questions about transportation, schools, housing, and immigration, among a range of important issues. Our aim tonight is to give you all a unique opportunity to hear from the mayor on her policy priorities as she leads the city into the second half of her historic first term in office. This is a town hall format, so you'll have a chance to ask your questions. Just head to slido.com, that's sli.do.com, slido.com, and we have it on the screen, trust me, and enter Mayor Wu, and we'll try and get to as many questions as we can. Moderating the interview tonight is host of WBUR's Morning Edition, Rupa Shenoy. Over to you, Rupa.
Madam Mayor, thank you so much for being here. It is such an honor to be on stage with you. Thank you.
No, thank you. It's my honor. It's you know, I don't know if anyone else has had this experience when you know someone's voice so intimately, and it's this trusted, comforting presence. Then you get to see what they look like. It feels like we all know you so well already.
Yeah, just don't tell me if it's a disappointment. So, I know you guys have questions. Thank you for everyone who've already put them in. Please, I'm going to give you like a minute to put some more in because we want to focus on your questions, but with the excuse that I'm giving you some time, I'm going to get one of mine in because this is actually the first time I'm getting to sit down and actually talk with the mayor. And I have been watching from afar, and as a fellow person of color and Chicagoan and woman, I guess I've been wondering, do you think it's made a difference to have someone with that background in this role? And do you think you've made different choices because of that?
I will say that in every space that I'm in, I am aware that there are people around the table, including myself, but also including many members of our team who are representing communities or backgrounds or experiences that may not have been as prevalently represented before. And I see, even in how our team makes decisions or at different community spaces that we've set up for decision making, I'll say in my head, I know if this person hadn't been there, that question wouldn't have been asked, or we wouldn't have been pushed to think about this or actually take that step. And so I hope that some of the things that I've been part of and the many, many conversations I've been really privileged to help shape in this role can include some of those same moments. You know, in general, I've been in city politics now for what feels like a long time. I was first elected in 2013, so over a decade now, serving Boston, first as an at-large councilor representing all the city, and now in my third year in this role. And it's hard to say exactly, oh, I would have done this differently back then, because the wider conditions of our world have also shifted so dramatically in this 10-year span. How we think about politics, how we interact with each other, how we even feel connected or disconnected from community, much less institutions like government and the media and trust overall. And so it is a very consequential moment, and that tends to infuse each decision that we make with such extra responsibility and urgency as well, as we see and feel so much destabilizing pressure from the world changing with climate change, or national politics kind of fraying the threads of our democracy, or the macroeconomic situation. Boston is not only a place where we are looking to serve our residents every day, but we are a place where the whole world is looking for signs of hope. And so I think we're trying to make decisions that not only reflect what it means to have someone who knows what it feels like to have to try to drop your kids off to school or get them, in and out of the house, while also doing this and balancing this and trying to make all the pieces fit together. But even on top of that, there's just a different feeling and urgency in the whole world right now around how we need to move and how to really try to deliver and actually get things done.
That's kind of a natural segue to something that your administration announced today, the mental health initiative, $21 million to Boston Public Schools for mental health initiatives. You have had a family experience with mental health. Kind of how is it meaningful to you? What does it mean to you to be specifically addressing this for kids?
It was a really exciting event earlier today where I had the honor of participating in a roundtable with several of our amazing BPS students alongside our superintendent, Mary Skipper, and director of the Boston Public Health Commission, Dr. Basola Ojukutu, and our chief of behavioral health, Dr. Kevin Simone. And we were listening to students talk about what is exciting every day, what is less exciting about school, and the needs and how mental health layers on top of almost every part of what they experience throughout the day. And we announced that the city, in partnership with some of our local universities and other levels of government and community organizations, is pooling together the resources to make a major investment in shaping the workforce for behavioral health, helping to fund the education, licensure, credentialing of behavioral health clinicians who will then be committed to practicing in the Boston Public Schools and supporting our work, whether it's social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, et cetera. And for me, this was deeply personal. I truly had not ever thought about going into politics at all growing up, but because of my mom's mental health journey and all that, then I was sort of thrown into trying to navigate as the oldest child, the oldest daughter in the family, and seeing the way that different systems are broken. Has stuck out in my family's experience over and over again that even when the resources are there, even when the programs exist and help is supposedly there, it can feel so far away in your moment of need if the access isn't there, if the language competency, and if the cultural competency, if the geographic distance and public transportation, all of those pieces can make it still feel impossible to access what you need. And so as we are thinking about now, people who will come from the same backgrounds and languages and lived experiences as our students, being able to stay in the city that they love and grew up in and give back in this way, it's an investment that will deliver so many returns for our young people, for our workforce, for our families, and for, again, what Boston means in the national context of this current gap in mental health access.
Another piece of news from today was a pretty long New Yorker article. I was hoping for one of those cartoons, maybe, but it was a great photo. And that was the headline there was on housing. And we are scheduled for a vote next week on your plan to create a planning department. And as you know, this week, a group of downtown residents came out and said, when you were a city councilor, when you were running for mayor, you were saying you wanted to abolish the BPDA, but this preserves its board and this whole plan. They criticize it for not being accountable enough or transparent enough. So ahead of this vote next week, how would you respond to that?
Well, it's been wonderful to partner with the City Council in vetting and going through the hearing process, and no guarantees. We'll see. The vote is to take place on their timeline since it's in their court right now, but we do hope that it will move swiftly. Just to take a step back for anyone who hasn't been following the minutia of planning and zoning and development review reform, Boston operates our processes differently from any other major city. We have a zoning code that is wildly outdated, has not been comprehensively updated citywide since 1965, in some ways by design, because when the code is so obsolete that you can't build any new projects according to what the rules are, and in fact, if you look at many of our streets that are filled with triple-deckers, most of those triple-deckers are actually out of compliance with the actual zoning code, but have gotten some waivers or special approvals. What that means for city government historically is that when a developer or project proponent needs to come before you to ask for a special permission to do their one project, that's the time to squeeze, right? You get a donation for Little League, you get a commitment to rebuild the street, you get dollars to fix the sidewalk, and it has sort of maximized the project by project civic contribution is one argument. But over time, that leads to such a slowdown in the process when you don't know what you're going to get out of it coming in, when the soft costs then pile up because it sets up a dynamic where you need to know someone who knows someone to help navigate for you, to figure out what the right boxes are to check to get that special approval. And it also leads to wildly inconsistent outcomes in what buildings look like, where, and who got to build what. And that it doesn't actually match often what is most needed in community rather than what was asked for in that moment or what felt like it could have been a deal to make something move through. So in order to get all that right, we need the actual rules to be real, to reflect the baselines that we expect for affordability, for resiliency as we're facing a lot of climate impacts as a coastal city, and for equity across the city. That means we need to have the community conversations to set the rules together. And it's impossible to do that without a true planning department. Boston is the only major city without a city-funded and run planning department. Our Boston Planning and Development Agency manages most of those functions, but there's a 70-plus page report out there that I put out when I was on the city council that still holds true, walking through the history of all of that. Over time, Boston's processes went the other direction as most major cities in concentrating power off the books of city government and outside of that accountability so that there would be a way to maximize more of the civic contribution without direct oversight through the process that every other department has to go through. So this would basically undo all of that. It would restore city planning as a function of city government, subject to the same accountability as every other department, and would be a huge step forward, the biggest step that the city has taken in 70 years to truly have planning. Is it everything that was laid out to fully sweep through and change the processes? No. And I think in some ways the beauty of city government is that we don't have the luxury of sitting around waiting for perfection. We don't have the luxury to stay talking at the level of generalities or platitudes. It's about how we can demonstrate progress day by day. Even if the steps may not be 100% each day, they start to add up quickly. And this step in particular has taken 2 years to analyze how to get it done, not only to structure the department properly with coordination among all departments, but to support the actual individuals who are doing this work. Incredibly talented, hardworking staff members who shouldn't be punished in their own salary expectations or benefits or as they're planning their families' lives because they're all of a sudden switching pension systems and retirement systems that had, all the minutia of how an HR transition happens. So it's taken a while to build up to this. We're ready to take this step now, and there's more work to do.
Are you worried at all about the reaction, though, that people have, and if it has gotten enough of a vetting from the public, especially after, it's a different subject, but with the OBrien School and pulling back from relocating the OBrien School, you've acknowledged, maybe there should have been more community input, community thought put into it, or we should have just introduced it in a different way. Has that entered into your thinking now when you're thinking about other things like this?
Well, I will say on this BPDA proposal, for me, at this point, it is almost an 8 or 9 year community process. The report, the many, many conversations that I have been very grateful to have when I chaired the Planning and Development Committee on the City Council, and now it has gone through a full public process with the official introduction of the ordinance and the City Council's vetting. And so I think there are always opportunities to continue pushing for full transparency and accountability. But in this case, with that proposal, it's a little bit of a different situation because this is now a multi-year process with lots of opportunity along the way. I think with the O'Brien School and some of the other individual projects that are on the table, whether it's BPS changes or the White Stadium being proposed in Franklin Park to be fully renovated with a partnership from a professional women's soccer team that would come to Boston, or infrastructure changes to some of our major roadways like Blue Hill Avenue, or some of the other projects that we're working on this part of the city with I-90 and Harvard and Alston. Each of these also, in some ways, the community process is playing out, I think, how it was intended to. With the O'Brien School, there was a conversation. We did not reach a consensus, and then the response of the city was to listen and to actually take the residents and school community members' feedback into consideration as we made our plans. For better or worse, at this moment, we have decades of deferred maintenance and other investments that are needed to catch up on. And so whether it's the O'Brien School or another school, whether it is this roadway or that roadway, this pool or that pool, there is enough to do that we need to have multiple processes running at the same time in order to keep moving forward. And my goal is that if we can start to build not just engagement with residents on each individual project, but a sustained relationship with the community about all the things that are happening in an area, that again only happens through community planning. And so it's really the planning department and our efforts to codify real rules that shape the future that our communities deserve. It comes through this process of changing our mindset about how, when, and how impactfully community voice is actually incorporated into how we grow and make decisions as a city.
You mentioned White Stadium, and I want to get to that. We actually have an audience question. We had several audience questions. So, but first, a last thought on O'Brien is to get to those community concerns. People have been asking that now that it's not going to be relocated, could it be renovated? Could it get on that, higher on that list for renovation? Is that a possibility?
So, so a couple things have happened in the last 2.5 years that we are really trying to change the underlying conditions for how quickly we can get to the ultimate goal for BPS. There are 119 school buildings in Boston. The vast majority of them need major repair, if not full reconstruction from the ground up. And the scale of what that means is quite staggering and beyond the scope of any 5-year city capital budget being able to be contained in that. And so the original proposal was that I had committed on the campaign trail. We had heard loud, vociferous, organized, and sustained community engagement around Madison Park, our city's only vocational technical high school, that it very much needs and deserves updates so that we can realize our full potential when it comes to workforce development and all of the tie-ins that this unique school is the only place that it's happening in the district. But as we analyzed the Madison plans, it became clear that because they share a campus with the O'Brien School, that there was an opportunity to accelerate 2 schools at once by putting the new building for the O'Brien in the existing West Roxbury campus bones, where it would be a renovation that could be done without displacement of existing school communities because it is just a vacant building that is sitting there right now. School renovation projects are extremely complicated, mostly because you have to keep teaching students and operating schools throughout the entire construction process. And so either you need major, very large swing space that can accommodate as many people as are in the school now, which, why wouldn't we be using that school already? So it's very rare to have that. Or you have to have a phasing plan where different parts rotate in and out and the other. And so having the ability to activate what is an incredible campus in West Roxbury, lots of space, so much infrastructure already built there in terms of youth sports and open space and all of the square footage that any high school community could dream of. That was a way to accelerate it. But because that was run through a community process and was not the consensus of where community wanted to go, that has been halted indefinitely. In the months since then, since that accelerated proposal was put out there, we've also done a deep dive into now having a full analysis of every single school building, what the needs are, what the condition of each asset, each boiler, each window, each water fountain, when it was last updated, when it will likely need to be replaced. All of that is in one place and also available to the public. And we have a set of school education specifications that were laid out so that we know for every elementary school, here's what we expect the facilities to deliver at a minimum. For every high school, here's the list of things that we know every high school must have from a space perspective. Putting all that together, we now have a clear data point for each individual school on where they stand of the vision of what it should have, where they are now with each asset. And the OBrien campus is actually about halfway through the pack. So everything is going to run through our long-term facilities plan. We will get to every single school. It will not happen overnight. We need to find new ways of funding and accelerating this work. But because that accelerated path was not the one that the community wanted and supported, we are going to basically restart each of those assets, the West Roxbury campus and the OBrien School, as part of that long-term facilities plan, and make sure that we can have it all fit together with the data and the needs that are identified across the entire district.
Okay, let's get into an audience question here. And this is about White Stadium. And as you mentioned, White Stadium is a professional women's soccer team is interested in coming in and making it its home, essentially, and doing a bunch of renovations. So the question is, why do you think this is the first time in a long time the city wants to seriously renovate White Stadium?
Well, actually, it's not the first time the city has wanted to renovate White Stadium. It's the first time that we are at the point of actually being able to do it. But we looked back over the course of multiple decades, and there have been push after push after push to try to make something happen there, whether it's through philanthropy and fundraising, or through city dollars, or through other partnerships, or through the Olympics, and none of that ever panned out. The reality is that, again, White Stadium is it's the home to Boston Public School student athletics. It is within the BPS portfolio of 119 buildings that also need a lot of work. And the costs of what it would take to fully renovate White Stadium today is in the scale of over $100 million to do it properly. I was just at the stadium yesterday. It's sort of where I go if I have time to take a quick walk with my family, and you see that the track is, the gravel is coming up from the track. The whole entire half of one set of the grandstands is unusable. So 10,000 seat stadium, they've only been able to use half of it for decades at this point because of a fire that happened in the 80s or 90s that really didn't get fixed up afterwards. The state sports associations do not count the times that our track athletes measure at White Stadium because they don't believe that it's up to competition standards, so they won't validate those milestones that our students reach. And we are just waiting for the opportunity to deliver this to the Boston Public Schools. The partnership that we have here, I think it's worth spending a little bit of time on because I think it's quite confusing. In the past, the city and or the school district have entered into partnerships that have ended up restricting the time and access in certain locations, in certain public parks, for example, where a college wanted to partner, and now community members feel and really have fewer hours that are just free and unprogrammed because a university or another entity is now using that. That is not the type of partnership that we are talking about here. Women's soccer right now plays 13 home games every single year. If they make it to the playoffs, there are a couple extra ones after that. They're adding 3 teams, and so the number of home games might go up. It may not. It'll be somewhere in that 13 to 15 range, most likely, and that's spread out over a period of March through September, October. The soccer team would end up taking less than 10% of the available hours, probably 2 weekend nights a month during those periods. The rest of the time would be fully programmed by Boston Public School athletes and community members. And so we know that it would at least triple the number of hours that BPS is using the stadium. Right now, there are some soccer teams that have practices there. There are 2 football teams that each play 5 home games there, and we have accommodations for them, and they would still be able to probably play the same number of total hours using the stadium with renovations than exists right now. And overall, this would deliver a brand new facility for our young people, with the soccer team providing the renovation funding as well as maintenance funding. And so it's quite a remarkable partnership, really, that is thanks to this ownership group, all women, all devoted to Boston, and who said they could have gone anywhere to try to find or build a stadium. They wanted to make a difference for the young people of Boston. And so we've structured a really unique agreement. We're still working through a lot of the details around traffic and transportation and making sure that community members are confident that their usage would be prioritized. But I can guarantee that this would open up the stadium for far, far more public uses than currently happens right now. Most of the time when you go to White Stadium now, it is locked up because the usage has fallen so much. And this would guarantee that soccer teams, track teams, football teams, and certainly community events that the community wants to see would be able to use it, unlike for the last several decades.
Thank you for that great explanation. Given that explanation, why do you think some very prominent groups like the Emerald Necklace Conservancy have concerns?
I think there's some misunderstanding of what we are trying to do, and some misrepresentation of what the facts are. There are many groups that have been engaged in this process, the Franklin Park Coalition, many of the neighborhood associations, who have used and are in the park every single day. As I understood it from the conversations that I had had with this group before they moved to litigation, they were very concerned. They don't believe that a park should be a space where there are large-scale events, which is ironic because if you actually live in the neighborhood and spend time at the park, it already hosts Puerto Rican Festival, BAMS Fest. 20,000 people come to the park for those events all throughout the summer, and it doesn't have a transportation or traffic plan, and so there's actually a lot of benefit in terms of infrastructure that would be delivered to the existing uses that would continue on with this. The other point that I think is what I was able to sense from the conversation is that they were worried about what was described as a precedent that would be set for other parks. And so some of the folks involved in this don't spend any time at all in Franklin Park. I don't know if they've even ever been to White Stadium, but are worried about other parks that they spend more time in other parts of the state, now having the chance for professional sports teams to go partner and do something there. I personally believe that when we talk about the point and the purpose of public parks, of course, tranquility and peacefulness and getting to enjoy and soak in the beauty of nature is a very, very important part of it. But if you go all the way back to Frederick Law Olmsted, who is the grandfather of landscape architecture, who designed Central Park, Prospect Park in New York, and then at the end of his career came back and designed Franklin Park, which is known, I describe it as the Mona Lisa of large urban parks. It is known around the world as a gem that represents that history. In fact, when you get down to his original philosophy, he talked about this term that he called communitiveness, that he believed parks were a place where, one of the only places where people from all different backgrounds could come together and you would feel some stake in what was happening to that person, that you might not know their name, you might not even talk with them that often, but you see them walking their dog there a lot, or you sit next to them at that soccer game. And so he specifically designed his parks to have all of those functions together. A quiet portion, that's now the urban wilds of Franklin Park, where the golf course was kind of shaped in that way. But half of the park originally was designed for active use. The playstead, which was always meant for public sporting events and people to come together, and the bear cages, this is now very outdated, but they're actually old raccoon cages that used to be a draw. I wouldn't want to go see them now, but there were all sorts of draws that were supposed to bring people together with lots of noise, with lots of activities, to purchase refreshments out of the refectory on Refectory Hill in order to engage everyone in that sense of communitiveness, whether you wanted to be with people in a loud, people-watching area or whether you wanted to take a stroll by yourself in the other part of the park. And so that is all part of the DNA of what Franklin Park is, and in some ways we are trying to restore that and make sure that the full usage of it for our young people, for our community members is prioritized as we find the resources to deliver on the larger action plan.
We're going to be jumping around a bit to get to the different audience questions. We had a question about a state initiative to convert more commercial space, office space, into housing. And that reminds me that you have a budget proposal coming up. And we also had a recent report that we're going to have a more than $1 billion shortfall over 5 years because of the lost tax revenue, because of that office space that's going vacant. Last point is that you've also mentioned that our budget is going to be hit because of the number of individual migrants who are coming, and so they're not covered by, they can't apply. They're not families, so they can't apply for shelter to the state. So all of that is to say, how are you gonna balance all that and do what you want in your coming budget proposal?
Well, how many hours of budget meetings have we had the last week? It's been, there's been a lot that we have been sorting through as we get ready to deliver the first draft of the budget to the City Council, which is due in the beginning of April. I will say the report, which documented some of the challenges that we're facing, that every city is facing now as downtown offices in particular are becoming less frequented, and therefore the ripple effects of what that means for city economies. The report documented many of those challenges very well, but there is a slight distinction that actually makes a big difference in how our revenues are collected. So this is probably going too much into the rabbit hole, but just for everyone to understand here, Boston's revenue, city government revenues that we fund all of the city services with, teachers, police, firefighters, EMS, filling potholes and all of that, it comes from a number of different sources, but our city is also a little bit unique in that almost 3/4 of that comes from property taxes. The rest, we don't have a lot of other there's no city income tax in Boston, there's no ability to add other types of revenue that some other cities can just sort of put on the books themselves. We're very bound to what state law is, and we're capped also in property taxes at 2.5% increase every single year. The way that state law is organized, though, that total amount that is collected is the same, whether it comes from residential properties or commercial properties. So if we see that commercial properties are all of a sudden going to drop in value and therefore contribute less to the tax rolls, it doesn't mean that the city falls short of that 2.5 increased percentage. It means that it gets shifted onto the residential side, which is also something that we cannot have happen. And so there's some precedent for how to address this. 2 decades ago at this point, there was a similar shift, but it happened because the city's residential values were all of a sudden going up much faster than commercial values were. And the way that formula worked out, residents were going to have a double-digit increase in taxes. And in order to avoid that, the city sought special legislation from the state, from the city council and the state ultimately, to be able to cushion residential taxpayers more and avoid that shock. We are looking at what that would mean, and I think that would be important to have those tools available for us to deal with that in this moment. Now, it doesn't solve the longer term challenge, which is how we make sure that those commercial values don't come down or continue going down. And that is about revitalizing downtown and really taking a different approach to how we think about that, all of those buildings. If you ask if I ask my kids to draw a city, any person off the street to draw a city, you're probably going to draw some boxy downtown skyscrapers, right? At least as part of it. I don't know, mine might draw a whole bunch of other things that are beyond the scope of it. But people often think of cities as they draw many meetings, people often think of cities as downtown areas. But today, when you don't have to go into the office to get to work because you're zooming in and everything is very different in our economy, we have to think about our traditional downtowns more and more as residential areas as well if we want it to be truly thriving with the foot traffic for economic opportunity for the small businesses and safety and activation and all of that. So we are pushing hard for those conversions. We had put together a conversion incentive program, nearly 200 units already of housing in the application stage or in the pipeline to be converted out of empty office buildings to residential units. Actions to encourage more people to come downtown, to work with employers and create opportunities for support. Ultimately, it's about transportation and whether residents and workers can reliably depend on public transit to get downtown. It's about the cost of childcare and whether Boston is an area that people feel they can afford to raise their families, and all of the other infrastructure costs that we need to reshape how our downtown functions, how our economy functions, and therefore how the city's services will be able to be funded. So for now, we are feeling very good about, certainly there are trade-offs that have to be made in uncertain economic times, but we have a very solid foundation. We're likely going to seek some of the legislative tools to have every option available. Should we need to exercise some more cushioning of different groups between the tax system. But our push is that we want the jobs downtown and the residents downtown to reflect a connection among each and every one of our neighborhoods too. Downtown should be just as residential a neighborhood as our other neighborhoods, and our other neighborhoods should have just as much commercial vibrancy in our small business districts as people have traditionally thought of in downtown.
To stay on a similar subject, the cost of housing. We had many questions around that. Here's one. The cost of housing is a serious problem in the Boston area, yet supply is increasing more slowly than other similar metro areas. What are you doing to fix this?
This is the priority that we need to make sure that this is an affordable community for everyone to live in. The city has several ways that we can impact this, and then there are kind of the bucket of other things that we are advocating for and hoping to work with other levels of government or other communities on. One is, we are not living in a bubble, and so there are many, many people who come into Boston who even say they're from Boston but technically live in some other suburb or nearby municipality, just given the how historically our lines were divided up somewhat arbitrarily over the years. That means that when there is a housing shortage, it is about the entire region rather than any individual city. So each city's contribution to that does matter. We are trying to do more than our share in Boston, but we also need to work with every other city so that housing is growing across the board. And so the state's efforts to ensure that every community is building into their zoning code opportunities for more housing is really important on that front. Public transit, again, is a key connector to make housing accessible to the job centers from every other point as well. We also need the state and the federal government to support the ongoing efforts for funding that can help close gaps for more housing production. So whether it's the governor's proposal for a fund that would help cities be able to create more affordability, or her proposal, which the city also mirrors in our own proposal, for a transfer fee at the state level that would put a very small transactional source of revenue on when a building is sold that is above a certain threshold, $2 million or more, a small fee at the point of sale that would then more than double the city's budget for affordable housing production. And we've been using that, using the federal recovery funds to make a big difference with that now, but those are all sunsetting now that we are several years past the pandemic. And then within the city's purview, maybe the biggest levers that we have to change things are our zoning code and the efficiency of the processes that we run to approve new developments. So we are trying to rezone the city, as mentioned, citywide through our Squares and Streets initiative, and we are also looking to streamline and update and modernize our approval processes wherever possible. When you need to spend multiple years of paying lawyers and consultants and others to get just through the process because the rules aren't clear, that is all dollars that could have gone to making the housing more affordable that is now absorbed in the soft costs. And so there's an executive order that accelerates affordable housing approvals that has gone very well, and we're looking to expand that beyond the eligibility of current projects. And there are also other ways that we're looking to reform, for example, our Article 80 process, which is the large-scale development review process, just to make it more predictable and move things along in a way that makes sense for community, but also can free up more of those dollars away from lawyers and consultants to affordability.
A related audience question, I'm going to read it here. The camping ban creates more violence, indignity, and insecurity for homeless people. Can you commit to humane resources for the homeless citizens of Boston?
I will just also make sure I'm kind of framing this for everyone in terms of the actions to date. I think this question is about some of the actions that we've taken around what's known in Boston as Mass and Cass, the intersection of Mass Ave and Melia Cass Boulevard, where it had been the most visible concentration of residents who were experiencing substance use, often mental health challenges, and homelessness. And when I had stepped into this role, it was at that point 7 years since the Long Island Bridge had been taken down, and therefore the region, New England region's largest concentration of shelter beds and recovery beds all of a sudden dismantled and kind of scattered in different places in the city, but some of it not restored to the numbers that they were at on the island. And in that time, by the time we started, there were nearly 200 residents who were living in tents and fortified encampments in that area of the city. Our first action was to really understand directly from those residents what their needs were. And sometimes you hear people say, well, people who are living on the street just want to be on the street. They don't want to go inside. But when you actually ask people, everyone wants somewhere warm and safe to be inside. But it's often that the existing shelter system didn't provide that and wasn't accessible because of past experiences in congregate spaces where belongings were stolen, or people had experienced violence in that shelter system, or that for particular communities like couples, there was no appropriate space because there are often single gender shelters that are available in that system, or no storage for private for personal belongings or other structural ways that it wasn't meeting people's needs. And so we worked to create housing that would reflect and would meet more of those needs. Specific housing, low threshold housing for couples, specific housing that included medical supports 24 hours a day. And we saw now at this point hundreds of residents move forward on their path to recovery with this individualized housing. We have since now, in the 2-3 years that our administration has been really learning from and talking to the providers and residents who formerly lived in the encampments, we heard that public safety was a big issue as well, to the point where even the providers who are on the ground every day had said, this is an unsustainable situation to be in, and we need to be able to have more guarantee of safety and health. And so the ordinance to require that if a tent is, if a shelter space is available, that the tent cannot be set up, it is meant to really ensure that the city's resources are going to actually serving people in need, rather than maintaining a status quo that had become untenable in terms of public health, safety, and the recovery of individuals. And so we are now able to deploy our mobile outreach units to any neighborhood in the city, rather than just being in one part of the city trying to maintain and sustain a semblance of safety. It has really been able to expand our outreach and expand our connection point for individuals who are in need of services to the providers much more effectively. And so we will continue to do that, but our approach has always been housing, services, recovery, and healthcare wrapped around an outreach model. And we believe that what has happened since this policy has gone into effect has actually been much more effective for delivering all of those services than the situation we had before.
We also have a whole group of questions around migrants, immigrants and refugees. Essentially, what can we do as a city and as residents to better support these incoming immigrants and refugees?
It's very, very difficult when I think about a challenge, I'm always trying to understand what we can do immediately, but also what is the bigger picture or longer term set of steps that can change the dynamic that we're in. Because it often feels in many of the challenges that we're facing across the city that once you get into a pattern of just treading water on a certain situation, a tremendous amount of resources can go into something, but then the very next day or the very next month, it feels like you're back to square one. And with the challenge around mass and cast, that had been a little bit of the dynamic that we were hoping to change with a new approach. And similarly, here it feels, I talk to mayors across the country all the time, the number of families who are arriving in need of housing and shelter and services who just want the ability to take care of their kids and be safe and be part of a community. It's the same stories that any of our families had as they first either came to this country or to the city. And Boston is a city that has always been that safe harbor to help people get on their feet and then contribute to our community. But the pace at which we are seeing new families arrive is significant when it comes to the resources that are necessary to provide adequate supports. And so, as the governor has been saying, there are changes at the federal level that need to happen. We see an immigration system where people are legally entering the country in order to seek the approvals to be able to work and live and stay in the country. But because of the backlog and because of the gap in resources that are available, the dates that they're given that they'll finally hear back on whether they were able to get those approvals are a year or even sometimes 2 years into the future with no plan in the meantime of how to support yourself. And so there's been a lot of advocacy from incredible groups here in Boston up to the federal government and with the governor and her team to try to shorten those time frames. All I hear from any of the families that I'm meeting is, tell us how we are able to work. We just want to contribute and take care of our families. And as we've been able to get the federal government to shorten those timeframes, some of the work authorization timeframes now guaranteed to be 30 days or less of response time, that has made a huge difference in how our shelter system can be effectively utilized, because people come, they need to get on their feet, they fill out the paperwork, get approved, and then once they're working, they are then a resident, giving back and paying taxes and filling the jobs that we all all benefit from being filled anyway. And so I think there are 2 points I want to make on this. One is that the more that we can find ways with every level of government to make our immigration system more responsive and humane about how families are treated when they are just going through the channels that are available, the more that actually translates into the city and state being able to serve these families. The second is that ultimately in Boston, it is again a housing issue. Every city benefits from an influx of new residents who want to work, contribute, grow a community, and we are a city where almost a third of our residents were not born in the United States. That has made us who we are, and that has made us the incredible diverse community that we celebrate. We only want to add to that. However, when housing is so tight, when our wait list for public housing of residents who have lived here for many, many years is already tens of thousands of people long, we desperately need more housing in order to tap into the benefit of newly arrived families and individuals. And so ultimately it comes back down to the zoning code and permitting reform and how every community can do their part to produce more housing.
Until we get that additional housing, though, we did have questions about the high cost of rent. And you didn't mention a rent cap capping the increase of rents in your State of the City this year. Is that something you're still thinking about?
It is a proposal that, in terms of where the city can take action and where we have to sort of wait and ask for other levels of government to take action, the city has already, we conducted a year-long process around analyzing best practices, developed a policy that would be ideal for Boston, that would stop egregious rent hikes that are of the scale that end up displacing residents and uprooting our students from our schools, and while also ensuring that we could have a thriving market for new housing to be produced. That proposal is up at the State House. It was passed by the City Council 11-2 last year, and that is the extent to which we can take action at the local level. It is now, given the structures of how Massachusetts government works, that kind of sign-off would need state legislative approval and governor's sign-off in order to become law. And so we remain supportive, and I firmly believe that this is necessary for Boston as we produce more housing to just stem displacement in this. Otherwise, we will be a changed city by the time we even get to the point where we're able to think about welcoming everyone.
I'm going to try and cram a few more subjects in. Lots of questions about the MBTA, which you probably expect. Back in September, you told our own Radio Boston that you ranked your concern over the state of the MBTA at a 4.8 out of 5. And you said then that you were encouraged by the work that Governor Healy and the T's general manager were doing to improve things. Since then, you've appointed a new representative to the MBTA Board of Directors, but we've also seen a number of service delays and just so many. So how are you feeling now?
At this moment, I think it's still very, okay, let me take a step back. In terms of all of the issues that I hear about that kind of flow together into the future of our city, right? What I hear employers saying, what I hear residents saying, what I hear students saying, families, the MBTA is threaded through all of that. It's what will determine whether our downtown is active or not from workers wanting to come back in person. It's what will determine whether we can add as much housing as we are hoping in certain neighborhoods, because we don't know if the capacity for public transit to then get other places will be there. It is central to our climate planning, to our congestion management. It's underlying almost every issue that we're talking about. So from that sort of urgency perspective, I'm still where I was in terms of this needs to be our focus as a region. From a confidence perspective, I am feeling much, much better about the direction of the MBTA. General Manager Phil Eng is incredible. We are so lucky that he agreed to come here, and he's the first general manager in a long time for the MBTA that comes from decades of transportation management. Every conversation I've had with him about this particular need or a challenge that we're experiencing here, he has just a wealth of reference points to say, well, actually, I remember in New York, something similar to that came up, and here's how we creatively solved that, or here's what I know we can do, here's what I need to get back to you on. And we are seeing steady progress in resolution of slow zones. We are seeing an approach that is finally proactive rather than try to stretch the changes and improvements out however many years into the future, because we were only willing to close down on the weekends, and therefore it was 3 hours of setup for 2 hours of work and then 3 hours of takedown. It's painful, but having a commitment to just getting it done over a one stretch at a time is going to speed up the fixing the slow zones more than anything else that could happen. They've also made a lot of progress when it comes to staffing and filling the vacancies that had accumulated over many years. And so they are on a good plan in terms of just trying to dig out. It's going to take more resources than they have now, and it's going to take sustained focus and prioritization. I've been trying to really understand every part of the system myself. I'm very familiar with the Orange Line, living where I do, but I've started a practice now of a couple times a week I will go to commute with a resident from wherever they're starting their day in Boston to wherever they're starting their job or school or wherever whatever they're doing for the day. And that has given me a view of not just all different parts of our system and where they're falling short. Sometimes it's very easy, small fixes that would make a big difference, but it's also giving a sense of where we're actually doing okay in the public transit system. And so it's my Commute With Me series where I try to commute with all different residents, and we now are, after every commute, I try to put out a little summary. I film just on my phone what the experience was like and what we went through, and that particular commuter's suggestions and recommendations for the MBTA. So I'm trying to do my part as well of generating a whole list of things for Phil and the team to respond to every week.
I'm sorry, I've missed that. I mean, have you been left kind of just waiting with one of these people?
So I've probably done like 7 or 8 so far. They're posted on our social media platform, so you can check out all the different routes that we've taken. Done a lot of bus, some blue line. I think I've been on every single line so far. Maybe not the green line, every other line so far. And no, the green line was shut down that day that I was going to go. That's why I was supposed to, but we didn't get to go on. And what has stuck out the most is that I will ask everyone at some point during our commute, how long does this usually take? So I can get a benchmark of how we're doing on that day. And nobody ever can say what the usual experience is because it is completely unpredictable. Sometimes it is great and you feel so lucky, and sometimes you predictably have something unpredictable happen. It is to that level of feeling like anything goes when you take that commute into your hands. So I think it's a showcase of all of the important ways that people are contributing to our city, working as teachers or in healthcare or as researchers or at Converse as a data engineer was the most recent commute that I did, but also how their lives are dependent on and rely on the choices that we make as a general public and how we prioritize and invest in public transportation.
I want to wrap by looking ahead, and about a year from now, you'll probably, if you're going to do it, you're going to be campaigning for re-election, but you haven't said if you're going to run for re-election. I was wondering if you might want to say that, and then if not, why not say it?
Okay, no one will share this, right? If I just say. So I will say that this is true. I mean, I feel lucky every single day to wake up and get to try to make a difference in the city that has made every difference in my life and my family's life, and that the team that I'm blessed to work alongside is just the most incredible people in the whole world. And we're working on trying to tackle the important, long-standing, often decades-long created systemic challenges that will take time to resolve as well. So many of the projects that we are working on extend far into the future. Every school building is a multi-year process. White Stadium already projecting into 2026. And so I hope to be able to make an announcement at some point about continuing to do this work. But you also have to understand that once an official proclamation of that kind is made, it completely changes your interactions with different members of the public or with family or this and that. And so it is a decision that needs an official vetting with my family and with others who are going to be in this. And I hope to be able to make that announcement at some other point when no one will tell anyone in Missouri.
All right, fair enough. Mayor Michelle Wu, thank you so much. We really
Thank you, Rupa.
It's been great.